Today's presentation consists of a panel made up of members of our community. And at this point, I'd like to hand this session over to our panel moderator, Dr. Christine Hendren.
Thank you so much, Karen and Amanda, again, for pulling this together. I'm excited to see us get some momentum. And my role is really going to be very minimal today, just to introduce our wonderful panelists so that they can give you actually more of a personal introduction to themselves. And to, if we have any need to spur on discussion and additional questions from everybody who's on the line today after they have each given their talks, then I'll do that. But really what I would like to say and set the stage about is that the reason we're pulling together as an InterReach community is because all of us have our own reasons for feeling that it would be of great utility to form a community of practice. What we mean by that and what we would like to get out of it and how we all got here is going to differ. And so I just want to set the stage for it to be a very inclusive conversation, speak up with what you might want to get out of it. And there you go. So after these folks finish, I'll open up and just see if people have questions for them. And then we'll just kind of have a fluid discussion that suits the group's desires from that. Each of our speakers today is going to introduce themselves, tell a little bit about what makes their job an InterReach job, as we understand this term, which is the Interdisciplinary Integrative Research Careers Hub is what we decided on for InterReach. And the reason we did that is to not rule anybody out, basically, that sees themselves as spanning boundaries and bringing people together to make science bigger than the sum of its parts. And so the three of our speakers will tell us again what they do, how they got there. You know, everybody had kind of a different path in getting to a position like this. Usually we've invented it or grown organically into it. And then each of these people has immense experience in this, not only doing the job, but thinking about what this field and what this type of integrative specialty means. And so we'd like to also hear from them where they think it's going, what's needed, and just their vision for the field and what this community of practice might be. So open-ended, I'm very happy to have Kellye Eversole and Pips Veazey and Jack Schultz. And so for no other reason than I just introduce them in that order, perhaps I'll hand it off to Kellye Eversole to tell you about herself. And thank you so much, all of you, for being here.
Well, thank you very much, Christine. I'd also like to thank you and Karen for organizing this. It's, you know, I commend you for taking the leadership and actually moving forward with something that I think will benefit all of us in the future and the field of science and technology very broadly. So perhaps the best way for me to start is to give you a little bit of background on me, because it definitely influences how I ended up in the field and what I do now. I had an opportunity when I was a junior in college to serve as an intern in the United States Senate, and ended up working for a United States senator, was an intern, got offered a job immediately, and was asked to stay on. So I ended up being a professional staff member for the senator and focusing on agriculture and budget issues. And my background up to that point was pre-med, pre-law. So I had prepared scientifically for that. And then I switched when I started with the Senate to political philosophy, and in fact got my degree in political philosophy and pursued master's studies beyond that. So my academic background is really ended up being mostly political philosophy, but I had a really good grounding in science to begin with. But I ended up spending 10 years in the Senate, both for working with a personal member and with as a professional staff member for the Senate Agriculture Committee. And then I was asked to lead a federal agency that was a study commission for 2 years. And I served in the executive capacity for that. And it was a short-term study commission. And mostly what I had done in the Senate had been high detail, very detailed, both looking at technical aspects as well as in political aspects as well. But the one thing that I spent from the early 1982 until I left the Senate in 1989, I was very involved in the Agricultural Research and Technology Committee or subcommittee, and was the staff, one of the key staff members for activities related to agricultural research. And so that really gave me an opportunity to expand my field. But the one thing that was the most striking for me during my time in the Senate was it was a time of great turmoil in agriculture. And so I had a chance to really work in the field of agriculture, trying to find solutions. And in fact, I think that's what really drove me to this field in general, is that we tend to be solution oriented. We see a problem, we want to help solve that problem and figure out a way to do that. And I think my time in the Senate really helped frame that for me and really gave me that background that I needed to know that, to have the confidence that I could actually do that. Well, after leaving the study commission that I led, I started my consulting firm focused on science and technology, primarily because I believed that science and technology was the answer for agriculture, much more so than government programs. I really felt that what we had to do was to empower science and technology and agriculture and make sure that everyone from small growers to the large commercial growers, as well as industry, to have the power to actually succeed. And so I really started out focused on agricultural biotech. My first clients were in the animal and plant biotech arena. And then in 1994, the National Corn Growers, which is the association of farmers, asked me to lead the Maize genome sequencing project. And actually, I can say the only reason they asked me is that I was the only person they knew who understood enough about science and politics to actually lead the project. And I think that's, in fact, the other aspect about this field. There's not a lot of us who actually work across all those boundaries. And so I began working with them, and that ultimately led to the establishment of what became the Plant Genome Program, which in a period of about 8 years provided about $1 billion to plant science research, and in fact really accelerated the implementation of mapping technologies across agriculture generally. And it was through leading that Maize Genome Project that I gathered quite a bit of expertise in genomics and in genome sequencing and in working in science and science policy generally. And really helping, one of the things that I had done very early, starting in 94, 95, was really working with the growers as well as the corn industry to figure out the strategy. So our focus was really on strategy. And, what is the strategy for success, both in terms of short-term success, but really more importantly, what's the utility of having a genome sequence? It's not about, your project is not focused on the having a sequence, it's what you're going to do with that. And so that flavors everything. So what I ended up doing after that was, because of my expertise there, I was then asked to help establish the microbial genome sequencing program in the United States, and then asked at the same time to establish an international consortium focused on sequencing all the major livestock and companion animals. And so we, in fact, worked across 10 different countries in both in terms of managing sequencing projects, individual sequencing projects, as well as the international projects that spanned many areas. And in that time, we really furthered our expertise, both in terms of strategy, but also in terms of implementation. And by strategy, I don't merely mean designing the strategy to put the project together, but I mean the scientific strategy as well. So we were very unique in that aspect as well, where it wasn't just the implementation strategy. It was really, do we have, what kind of a sequence do we need? What kind of a person do we need working with us to help us design that sequencing strategy? And that's really what we started to do. Subsequent to that, beginning in 2005, I was asked to do the same thing for the international wheat industry. Both the growers were engaged as well as the European wheat industry. And we went from, and this is a project I'm still engaged in, and we went from having 12 members in 2005 to we have about 1,600 today, and we have projects going on in 25 different countries that we coordinate, manage. We also design, so the industry will pay us to actually coordinate the projects. Not only coordinate, they'll say, okay, we want to accomplish one objective. So they give us the funding to do that, and we find the right people to do it, manage that project, and then ensure that the deliverables are met. So that's really the focus of what we have evolved from in the past 26 years. We're also launching another major nonprofit. We launched it this past year. Again, it's funded mostly by industry, which is the same for the wheat consortium and was the same for the animal consortium, genome sequencing consortium as well. And we really work at this interface of, what everyone talks about in terms of the triple helix of innovation. And that's really what we do. We really try to find pre-competitive areas that we can get funding to move forward that will advance the purposes and needs for everybody. So that's been really our focus. And my interest in this field, and I'm pleased to see that it is beginning to really develop, is primarily because, I'm looking at my career. I've spent 26 years doing this, and I'd like to find more people that will step in behind me and not only work with us and work with both my company as well as with our nonprofits, but who would actually be the new leaders for these kinds of projects in the future. And in working with industry, the one thing that many of them think is that they really want someone who can bridge both areas, who understands the needs of industries, but knows how to work with academia at the same time. And so we really need to expand this field of working in a multidisciplinary manner. And also, I think the other aspect that I'm really interested in is to encourage the scientific community and scientists in general to go beyond, to get beyond your comfort zone, because that often is where things bog down, is when, and for me, I had the pleasure or privilege of working in the Senate, and we didn't have time to get all the details. You just don't have time to get all the facts. You have to make decisions and move forward. And that's what often this field calls for, yet most scientists are trained just the opposite of that. You're trained to get all your details in order, become the expert in those details before you actually proceed. So I'd like to see this field help build the leadership skills for scientists to actually move beyond that when it comes to leading projects. So that's kind of what I do, and we manage mostly international consortia, but we also do other minor projects, and I work with agricultural or with entrepreneurs from the developing world, mostly in the agricultural science and technology arena. But that's primarily what we do. So I'd be glad to answer any questions. I hope I haven't taken too much time.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you, Karen or Amanda, for doing that. Or maybe Matt. Thank you, Kellye, for what you just added. I've been very much looking forward to hearing about your role. I think maybe we'll just, if everybody could hold your questions, we'll go through and then do 10 minutes from Pips and then 10 minutes from Jack. And then we feel free when we get to the end of that to pose questions to one panelist in particular, if you're curious, or to all. So thank you so much, Kellye. And Pips, if you'd like to jump in with your contribution, that would be great.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Christine and Karen and Amanda for setting this up, and great to see Kellye and Jack, and looking forward to today's conversation. And thanks for this. I put together a few slides, so I'm going to share my screen while I'm talking. But my name is Veazey. I'm the Associate Project Director for the Alaska Experimental Program to Stimulate Competitive Research. It's a National Science Foundation funded program, and I've been with the program for about 8 years. I started out as the Education, Outreach, and Diversity Director, and am now the Associate Project Director. This is a 5-year project. We're in our second set of 5 years, so we've been working together for about 10 years. Just a little bit about Alaska. We're a fairly big state, so our team is spread out. We have about 75 people working on the project, 75 scientists. We have lots of stakeholders around the state. So we get together and have face-to-face meetings once or twice a year, but really we're working a lot virtually. And so we're dependent upon technology to connect us, and using different modes of technology depending on what the meetings are for and how people are connecting. But essentially, our program is looking at, it's an interdisciplinary effort to look at how people are responding to changes in Alaska. We have physical scientists, biological scientists, and social scientists, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the structure of our project. We have 3 test cases, one in South Central Alaska on the Kenai Peninsula, and those are small communities that are adapting to changing environments on the Kenai. As things get wetter and more unpredictable, the fish habitats are changing, and people's adaptation strategies are changing as well. We have a test case in Juneau, which is looking at receding glaciers, and so a lot of physical science and looking at how glaciers are changing and how that's impacting how people are living. And then we have a test case on the north slope of Alaska, and that's individual small households. Many of our communities are not reachable by car, and so people fly to most of the communities in Alaska. Overseeing this whole project is a coordination, integration, and synthesis group, which is taking a lot of the information that is being developed by our researchers and putting it together into reports and papers, academic papers, and our portals and databases, and allowing people to access it. We also have a cyber infrastructure group that's looking at managing the data portals, providing access to people, and keeping the program connected. And then we have an education, outreach, and diversity group. So there's a couple hundred people in the program working across Alaska. We've been working, people, kind of come in and out of the program, but we've been together. The core group has been together for about 10 years. One of the things that I'm particularly interested in is that flow of data to information, to knowledge, and how we develop knowledge from data. We collect, as universities, we collect lots and lots of data. We're in Alaska particularly good at collecting data about the Arctic environment. And we collect, information and data on the aurora and ice and volcanoes and earthquakes and the animals and the people. And what I find in the course of my fairly short career is that a lot of times the data stays tied up in people's computers and at universities. And really, if we want to have an impact, we need to make that bridge between the data that people are collecting and the science that's being done into an arena where people are making decisions about their communities or about their countries and about their states. And I'll talk about that a little bit more, but I find that one of the most fascinating parts of my job is being able to help bring that data into a place where we can develop information from it and really get it out and make it, help develop societal knowledge and make it useful for making decisions. So these sensor networks that we have all over the state, we're measuring measuring things that are happening in our world, we're comparing those measurements to what people's perceptions are. Do people perceive that Alaska is changing? Do people perceive that temperature is changing? Do people understand that water patterns are changing and precipitation patterns are changing? The idea with our program is that if people understand that something is changing, they're more apt to be able to adapt to those changes. If there's not a knowledge of things that are changing, there's no reason to adapt. Things are working well, life goes on as usual. So it's really that combination, or that pairing of those perceptions and our instrumentation to find out how people are adapting to changes, and if they are. So we're getting lots and lots of information. This is a busy graph, but it just kind of shows the complexity of looking at something kind of as big as change in Alaska, which is what we ended up calling it, because it was a very interdisciplinary program. But we're looking at, as you can see, the 3 test cases at the top, and the physical, the hydrological, biological, cultural changes that are happening in integration, the integration focus that we have on bringing all of those pieces together. When I was a graduate student, when I was an undergrad, I got a degree in psychology at Bates College in Maine. And I was really interested in how people worked and why people thought things, and thought, oh, this is great. I'm going to have this science of people, and I'm going to understand people. And I really loved doing that work. I loved studying psychology. But by the end of my psychology degree, I thought, boy, I really need to get back to like something where that I can really measure, that I can grasp, and really something kind of more quantitative. And so I got a master's degree in oceanography and spent a couple of years between Greenland and Antarctica studying the ice sheets and drilling cores and looking at crystal structure and measuring things. And I had all these nice tight little numbers and reasons why things happened, very cool reasons why ice grows in Antarctica, and with this super cooled water that comes out from under an ice sheet. So it was really, really exciting work. It was really cool to be in Antarctica. I unfortunately timed that wrong and ended up spending like 2.5 years in winter going back and forth from the North Pole to the South Pole. So that didn't work out so well. But really exciting work. And I remember my parents saying, like, you went from psychology to oceanography, like, how does that work for the rest of your life? And now I find myself doing something that actually does involve understanding how people communicate with each other, understanding what drives people, trying to be that person that can help move a project forward by understanding what people need, and being able, somebody who can listen to people, somebody who can mediate, somebody who can facilitate. It's those people skills that I am always looking to develop, enhance in myself, that I find so incredibly helpful for the job that I do as the associate project director. And one of the projects that I've been working on lately is this thing called Decision Theater North. I am the lead for this project, and essentially we borrowed and partnered with Arizona State, who built the first Decision Theater about a decade ago and has since renovated it once, and they built another one in DC at the McCain Institute. So we've been partnering with Arizona State and the McCain Institute, and now have built our own little decision theater here in Alaska. And this really just ties together my love of bringing together people with information and being able to develop that pathway to get this incredible information and data that we're collecting at the university through our program out into people who can, who need information and who need to understand what's happening, and these data-driven scientific approaches to decision-making. And we're thinking about how to, I am thinking specifically about how to use other techniques like scenarios or design thinking to think about some of these complex problems where in society where we may not even be able to define the problem, let alone understand where we need to be in 5 or 10 or 15 years to make decisions, and how do we make decisions based on that kind of landscape. So I wanted to just kind of like just put that out as a project that we're working on. We've done this very inexpensively compared to Arizona State and have very much appreciated their the sharing of their information and how they have they've developed their project. But here's just another example of the decision, or another picture of the decision theater that I wanted to show this group, because I think I hope that this group is interested in some of these things that I'm interested in, and getting that information out to policymakers. And we've spent, I've invested a bunch of money in the last year thinking about data visualization and trying to bring together the components and build capacity within our university system to do that better, and really think about how we're visualizing data, and what skill sets we already have at the university. We do a lot of modeling. We do agent-based modeling. We look at scenarios. We use all sorts of software. We have an incredible GIS group. We have satellites that are downlinking data to the university. We have an incredible wealth of information, and how do we visualize that information that people need? But also, how do we facilitate those kinds of events where people are sitting around a table and we're thinking about this space, this decision theater space, as this extended distributed cognitive network. So people and technology are working together as a unit to address a problem. And I think that's a really exciting thing to think about. And one of the things that I want to invest in this year and next year is how we facilitate these kinds of conversations. There's a debate right now going on about empathy and how you, and should you try to promote empathy in talking about complex problems that probably many of our programs are addressing right now. So I think those are some of the exciting things that I'm looking forward to. I think there's a need for an increased need for team approaches to complex research and policy questions right now. There's lots of advances in data visualization technology. We have unprecedented data sets and sizes of data. And then just kind of the growing acknowledgement of the importance of visual stimuli to engage the decision-making process. All these things I thought were kind of, it was timely to be involved with a project like this. So that's kind of my passion, and I see the roles that probably a lot of us play in connecting people and ideas and supporting people and bringing together the right people to the table, helping define what the question is that we want to ask, and helping understand what information we need in order to answer those kinds of questions. I know this isn't exactly, that kind of role has evolved for me over the last few years, where I started strictly as a project administrator to say, okay, well, we need to get this budget set up, and we need to make sure that this runs well for this person, and we need this technology. So it was kind of putting all the pieces together. But as I've been more and more just allowed to kind of pursue my own ideas of what I think are important, this direction has become really exciting for me. I guess the final thing that I'd like to mention is that my graduate work, I'm a PhD candidate. I finally passed my comprehensive exams in the spring, and last spring, about 9 months ago, and started drinking coffee. I'd never had a cup of coffee, and I passed my comprehensive exams and started drinking coffee. So that's been another exciting thing for me, is that I now drink coffee. But my PhD work is looking at team management competencies. What does it take to do the things that I'm doing and that I know a lot of other people are doing? The National Science Foundation EPSCoR program, the experimental program to stimulate competitive research, is a state-based program and interacts with about 28 different states. So there's 28 other people like me that are leading or managing these big, complex statewide programs. So they all came together at the National Science Foundation and helped me to map out what these team competencies, these management competencies look like. So this is a very first draft of my PhD research. Haven't ever showed it to anybody except my kind of advisor and my close colleagues. So what I thought was really exciting about this was that project management was obviously very important. The 1A and 1B represent ideas that support project management, the knowing and doing of the things that we probably all do. But very important also, and even maybe more important, as evidenced by the number of ideas and the plots that we're seeing, is this idea of emotional intelligence for the jobs that we do. And I thought that was a really exciting kind of preliminary finding, and I'm looking forward to delving into that more. So I just thought maybe this group would be interested in seeing that, so I'm happy to share that with you. Really looking forward to what Jack has to say, and hoping that we see a lot of people at the Science of Team Science meeting, because that's been a great place for me to bump into colleagues and to learn more about what other people are doing, and happy to share my experiences, and looking forward to hearing everybody else's.
Thank you so much, Pips. That was wonderful. Great to hear from you too. It's really neat to see how different even just the two of your jobs are, Kellye and Pips, but then how much overlap there is as far as kind of discerning the tacit knowledge necessary to make the connections that without you there would either happen suboptimally or not at all. So that's really great. And I'm realizing that we have until 3:30. This is a 2 to 3:30 meeting. And so that was on my calendar, but if it escaped anybody else too, we're gonna have plenty of time. Keep a note of all your questions. We will we'll move on to Jack now, and then we'll go to a broader discussion after. So Jack Schultz, please take the floor.
Can I sit down? It's okay to sit down?
Absolutely.
You're hearing me okay? All right, good.
Yes.
I'm really jealous of Pips for two reasons. First of all, I want one of those arenas. I really want one. And I'll be asking you what it costs a little later. The other thing is, boy, could I use training in psychology. If there's anything lacking in my background for this job, that's it. And so I'm jealous of that as well. Okay, I'm a fundamental life sciences researcher. My research has always been aimed at understanding the way the natural world works, although you can't do that for very long without getting involved in agriculture. My focus has been on the chemistry of interactions among species and between species and their environments. So what you call what I do is often chemical ecology. So Pips has started drinking coffee, and I suspect that that's not a taste choice, it's an awakeness choice. One might ask the question, why does a coffee plant make caffeine, which is what we're all interested in? And the answer is it's an insecticide. And pretty much everything we know about taste, odor, our use of spices, the way we've shaped flavors in our world, and about 80% of our medicines, all of that is based on plant chemistry. And from the plant's point of view, that's all adaptive in dealing with the stresses and strains of living in their original environment. So I work on and tell lots of stories about why things taste the way they do, smell the way they do, and kill the way they do. And yet, I almost flunked out of college in chemistry. It was not a pretty sight. Having been a very successful high school student, I went to the University of Chicago thinking I was going to be pre-med, and then chemistry hit, and that was the end of pre-med. And I think we've all heard that story many, many times. So I thought, well, what do I really like about biology? And I like the way things behave, and so maybe I could study animal behavior. And the first course I encountered was chemistry of the brain. So we didn't get off to a flying start with chemistry. But as I went on through graduate school, I was interested in interactions like why certain insects eat certain plants, why some plants seem to be immune to disease, how plants can cope with things like drought stress and so forth, and realized a couple of things. First of all, almost everything I just listed, as well as everything else that happens in an ecosystem, has a chemical component. So when I have worked at the La Selva Biological Station in Costa Rica, where there are 700 species of trees in a space about the size of our local town here, Columbia, that's about twice as many species of trees as you have in all of North Carolina. The number of chemical connections and the importance of chemistry it jumps out at you. In a tropical rainforest, it's as much fun to walk around tasting things, although you need to be careful, as it is to watch things. So here I am, a postdoc, trying to understand some of these biological interactions and learning that, to my dismay, they are largely chemical in nature. So this should make sense to anyone. Am I going back to school to try chemistry again? No, I'm not. I'm looking for a chemist as a collaborator. And fortunately, right off the bat, I found some. Progressed through a career, it's been now 40 years. Still trying to answer the same kinds of questions. Why these trees? Why those insects? Why these diseases? How do soils work? How do plants get nutrition? All that sort of thing. But it turns out that all the other players in the system have chemical connections as well. And so the way a plant defends itself against an insect depends on whether it's also defending itself against the bacterium. And the bacterium has parasitic viruses that are attacking it. And birds are eating the insects that have the parasite, the diseases, and so you kind of get the picture that there's a lot going on there. So as a consequence, over the course of my career, I have worked with birds, all kinds of plants, all kinds of insects, bacteria, viruses, both above ground and below ground. And I can assure you that I am not the master of any of those subject areas. What I am, though, is a good integrator, and I understand the need for input from different sources and the connections among things. So, for example, as I listen to Pips and Kellye speak today, the calculus in my mind is, what do they have in common? What are they doing that's similar? And what can I learn from that? That's turned out to be a really useful interest and skill, because now my job is understanding what 30 or 35 independent investigators at the University of Missouri are interested in, what they know, and what they might have in common so that I can get them to do something together. I'm now director of a research institute, essentially, in which the watchword is team science. If you go to our website, you'll see we treat science as a team sport. The reason we have this center is that about 25 years ago, the dean of the College of Agriculture here at the University of Missouri figured, as Kellye had already done, that molecular biology was going to become important in agriculture. That wasn't always a popular idea at that point. But he started hiring molecular biologists into the College of Agriculture, and pretty soon had created a community of molecular biologists on the campus. Well, one molecular biologist leads to another, because after all, molecules are molecules and DNA is DNA. And pretty soon there was a pretty good group of molecular biologists on campus with nowhere to go. So that dean and our former federal senator, Bond, got together and said, why don't we put some of these people in a building together so they can work together? And that's the building in which I'm sitting. It's the Christopher Bond Life Sciences Center. Now, the idea originally was sort of getting more than the sum of the parts by mixing really good people together, seeing what they can do. Unfortunately, and this is how my situation differs from the others we've been hearing, unfortunately, the people who populated the building were not selected on the basis of their desire or willingness to do things together. So my situation confronts 35 very successful principal investigators, some of whom have massive amounts of funding. I mean, our center spends about $20 million a year on research. Most of that is federal grants coming from 30 individuals. And we have people here who have 4 NIH R01 grants and are paying their salary several times over. It's really fairly amazing. But do they have to do anything together? Well, the rules of the center say they do, but it's not necessarily clear to any of them because they were not put together with a common goal. So I've spent 10 years trying to get agreement from 30 to 35 investigators on common goals so that they can then see why they should work with the person next door to them. It's been an interesting adventure, and sometimes successful, sometimes less so. Because we have a memorandum of understanding with our investigators, I am able to move investigators out of our center, which is the state-of-the-art facility on our campus, back to their home departments if they are failing to cooperate. That's not easy to do. I pay 50% of each salary, and the home department pays 50%. So if you're the chair of the biology department, did you save the 50% of that faculty member's salary that I'm paying? And the answer is almost always no. You spent that 50% on another faculty hire probably. And did you save the lab space for the person who is located in our building? No, you didn't do that either. And so when I find someone here who's not living up to our expectations, I have to convince the investigator, the home department, that department's college dean, and the vice chancellor for research, that it's okay to do what is already written into our memorandum of understanding. I have been able to do that, and actually the relationships in the center have improved as we have managed to move less interactive people out. We keep careful records of who does what with whom and what that turns into. I have a network map of the building based on interactions. It looks an awful lot like an ecological network. The connections aren't necessarily chemistry, though. Some of them are. So has this worked out? Well, very frequently, yes. We have some collaborations here that have accomplished amazing things. We have people here who work with zebrafish, fruit flies, lots of different kinds of plants, lots of viruses, mice, rats. They have collaborators working with cattle, and we have the nation's only NIH transgenic pig facility. So there are all kinds of possibilities, and those people are constantly exchanging genes. So we have zebrafish with plant genes, we have plants with human genes, we have all of those kinds of crazy things going on, and every once in a while they produce an amazing result. Now everybody in the center is a basic scientist. We are not obligated to do anything useful. I do a lot of tours with legislators, and they really don't react well to that statement. But in point of fact, our job is to uncover fundamental information that can then go on to be applied in useful ways. And it's not actually true that our investigators are not interested in that. In fact, we have produced what is currently the world's best anti-HIV drug. It's expected to replace all anti-HIV drugs currently taken by HIV positive people with a single monthly dose, which is just unbelievable. It's just amazing. We have discovered and hold patents on lots and lots of soybean and corn and other genes, and have developed plants that are resistant to all sorts of things. So that happens. We've spun off 4 small businesses, and our people are funded by USDA and federal agencies that have applied goals as well. But what's really interesting to me is the whole issue of motivation. I was motivated to cooperate with people well outside my comfort zone by an interest in answering a certain kind of question or a certain set of questions. It was really easy to me to see, remembering my chemistry grades, that I was not going to answer those questions alone. And so for the last almost 40 years, I've been doing that kind of research. It's been sponsored, paid for continuously by the National Science Foundation that entire time. And every time the question demands a new expertise, I find another collaborator. I've learned a lot from those collaborators, but they wouldn't want me running their instruments in their laboratory. And to me, it's just a natural thing to do. On the other hand, if you've been a very successful academic investigator with your own funding to do your own thing, the question arises, why would you do something with someone else if you don't need to? Why don't you need to? Well, there are two reasons. One is your questions are so narrow that you can command all of the information and knowledge you need to do it. The other is that you're really not interested in questions that require you to work with other people. It just doesn't occur to you. Our building is designed to overcome that. The building was designed by the architects with lots of meeting places in all the hallways. We have whiteboards all over the place. We are the campus's favorite meeting place. In fact, I have an event staff, and we actually use more of our square feet on events than we do on research, which is amazing to me. Sometimes I feel like we're running a hotel or something. And all of our labs are joined. You can walk right from one lab to the next. So the physical plant is pretty much doing its job. The job that remains is the one that comes out of psychology and requires understanding what each investigator wants, desires, needs, imagines, and figuring out how that might overlap with the next investigator's wants, desires, needs, and imagination to see if they can do something together that sort of exceeds what either of them could have done together. There are two factors that work there. One is more grants, and the other is more publications. I can easily make the argument to most of our people here that if you have a grant and I have a grant, together we can get a third grant. And that's the most often successful argument that one can make here, that and basic curiosity. The other issue is publications, and that works the same way. So everything here is, multi-authored. Of course, the entire world is pretty much multi-authored these days. So I'm constantly working the sort of the career goals of the scientists into a position where it's clear that if they did something with someone else, they'd probably be more successful. But this is academia, and everything is done by negotiation. I cannot say, you're fired because you won't cooperate. I have talked to people in industry and people in government labs who do what I do. They have the ability to say those things, which in academia you don't. So it's really sort of constantly re-examining why people should do things together that occurs to me. Sometimes you can go very far outside of your comfort zone to accomplish a goal if you can, again, if you can get interest. We, over the last few years, have really taken on the problem of communicating with the public in a big way. I've hired communication staff. I have a strategic communication expert here on staff. And we wanted to begin training graduate students, postdocs, and faculty to communicate with the public, which I do a lot of, but I'm not an expert on that either. I've got to publish that book, I guess. But anyway, so I thought, well, how can we do this? Well, the University of Missouri has a terrific, one of the top 3 journalism schools in the country. And if anybody knows how to communicate with the public, it's supposed to be journalists. So I started to make connections in the School of Journalism, and pretty soon we had enough expertise to apply for a Howard Hughes Medical Institute training grant, and did that, learned more about how to train students to communicate better, and started building a team here. So now we have an NSF grant based on a training grant based on the communication team that we've assembled that includes scientists, strategic communications people from journalism, journalists from journalism, someone from the architecture school, and someone from the theater department. We have a Center for Applied Theater here. All of us make a great science communication education team. And let me tell you, dealing with people in theater, for example, was way outside my comfort zone at the start. But we've become great friends because we agreed that this was a really interesting problem to solve and none of us could do it alone. So summarizing, I guess I'm a guy who's in a place that's a natural fit because we're expected to do things exactly the way I like to do them, which is cooperation among people with rather different interests and knowledge bases and so forth. I'm trying to do that in an academic environment where there is virtually no direct line authority, and people cannot be directed to do anything. So the whole job is cajoling, and I guess what they call in politics jawboning, trying to convince people that it's in their own best interest to talk to the person next to them and see what they can do. That, by the way, is greatly helped by alcoholic beverages. Some of our best grant proposals and collaborative projects have come out of Friday beers here. Something, and I'm not conservative about that, but at first, as the director, I was a little nervous about it, but it turns out to have been one of our most creative decisions. And so I'm spending all my time in the social sciences. If it's not psychology, it's communications or almost everything that, I don't know what I would have gotten in college as grades in those subjects, probably better than chemistry. But they all come together in the end, and I think that what this subject area needs are people like the three of us who are motivated by interest in doing things this way, and are willing to spend enough time with other people's in other people's corners of the universe to understand why they do what they do, how they do it, without necessarily knowing every detail. And I think that's the skill we ought to be teaching in graduate school. So that's it for me.
Thank you so much, Jack. That was those were three really fascinating views of people who do this type of work and different facets. I mean, I'm sure all of us have a bunch of different reactions, and this work has been going on. In some ways, it's new to each person who does the job because we've each kind of found ourselves inventing it or seeing a need to make the case for ourselves even as we're doing the work. And to explain what it is, the value, the intellectual leadership value besides the service or deliverables that we're bringing to the table. So all of you guys have given great insight to that. And this is showing me how this community of practice can add to a lot of the work that's already done. There's I know the Association for Interdisciplinary Studies that has been around a long time, since I think the late 70s. And I see Bill Newell's on, so I know that we're preaching to the choir in some sense of the fact that these skills are extremely necessary. I think we're just hitting a critical mass of time where we're seeing that we're not going to solve the complex problems that all funding is coming out to address. I think there's fewer and fewer of those narrowly defined research questions that you referred to, Jack, where people can, knock out the answer solo. I think that that's not the direction things are going, and so I'm fascinated. I think that if all of you are comfortable with using the functionality within Zoom, if you click on the participants tab, you can see who's online, but the important part is that you can click a button that says raise hand. And if you do that, then I can see if there is somebody who would like to ask a question to any of our panelists, and you can unmute yourself, or I can do so. That sometimes helps to mitigate the issues of talking over each other. If for some reason you can't get to that screen, just unmute yourself and speak so that you don't get kicked out of the conversation for technical reasons. But I'd love to open it up for questions for our panelists, one or all of them. Kellye, you have a question. Go for it.
Yeah, so I think something that Jack said that is really, really important, and certainly has been important in everything I've done, and that you really have to find people who want to work on an interesting problem and who know that they cannot do it alone. And in many cases, they do tend to be practical problems, but it's refreshing to see that at the fundamental level that also is occurring. And I also had, so that's just a comment, but I also had a question for Pips. In looking at your PhD work, which looks really interesting, where do you see strategic thinking? Is that a part of that process?
Yeah, definitely. Strategic planning and strategic thinking was really critical. When you look at that, that was absolutely one of the ideas that this kind of experts group came up with as being critical. Strategic planning has become much more kind of a fundamental process that we're undertaking right now, and really using it as a helpful mechanism to and a plan that can be revised as you go along. I think the first time I did a strategic plan, it was kind of the way everybody thinks of a strategic plan, and it got put into a folder and put on the, we checked the box, we did it, we're okay, yeah. But really, the strategic plan that we have now, it has milestones, it has metrics, it's very concrete, like we will do this by the end of this year, and this is where we will end up 5 years from now. And that gets modified. So every year we go back to look at it, we make modifications, and that strategic planning exercise has become very, very important. And we've become better at doing it too. Now there's somebody that we've worked with who's an external person. It's not one of us who has kind of vested interests in all the different things that we're already doing. So somebody just to lead that conversation, some very, a very well qualified person to lead that conversation, we found has been really helpful. So I think that is a very important thing, and something that we're not necessarily hiring for or identifying that characteristic when we're hiring for these kinds of roles. And I think that's an important thing to think about too. So when we do go to hire people to fulfill these kind of jobs that we're talking about, are we making it explicit that we do want to have somebody who can think strategically, who can act strategically, who can pull together a strategic plan, and what does that plan mean? And so I think I have seen that a lot. I just don't think we're hiring for it yet. I think people recognize that that's important. And that kind of gets back at the, what are we teaching graduate students and how are we training people? And we don't have, as far as I know, a good conceptual plan of what that looks like for people who want to do the kind of work that we're doing. And I think back to my undergraduate years, and like the jobs that I think are really exciting now didn't exist when I was an undergraduate, and now I think there are all these amazing kind of interdisciplinary jobs in science and communications, and that my kids and their friends are applying for, some of which I've never even heard of before. It's really, I think, really, really exciting. But that means that in jobs like ours, we're kind of backfilling to say, well, now this job exists, how do we train somebody to get there? And I think strategic thinking skills and critical thinking skills are incredibly important, and that has definitely come out in my research.
So I'm curious, and Jack, with regards to this, really both of you, because what I do is I work with industry a lot, or work with particular institutes on their strategic planning or strategic thinking. But I can do it from the outside, and I'm doing it in many cases. It's to achieve a specific objective. That's very different, I would think, with what you had to have to deal with on an everyday basis. What does that strategic plan actually look like, and how does that fit in?
Well, the academic system is set up to fail on this, in my opinion. The reason I say that is that the folks who get things done, the faculty, are rewarded for individual success primarily. And that continues to be true through the promotion and tenure system. That is changing. Nonetheless, if you're a powerful enough scientist, for example, based on your publications and granting, there is absolutely no reason for you to pay attention to the good of the common. We have a real problem with the tragedy of the commons in academia. It is incredibly difficult to find an individual faculty member, for example, in our center here, who will put the success of the center ahead of the individual success. And I think that's true on a university-wide basis. I don't mean to depict everybody as selfish, but people do act on their own behalf. And as long as the reward system says acting on your own behalf makes you successful, it's hard to make this change. So then you run into the problem that higher administration is thinking about the organization, but they have to somehow figure out how to get cooperation from the lower levels in order to achieve their goals. to make that worse, they have multiple goals. There's education, there's extension, there's research. I mean, a university is a complicated business with lots of things it's supposed to do. Different faculty are engaged in those activities. And each faculty member, each researcher, for example, is maximizing his or her own fitness in a system that would actually like some of that fitness to carry out the organization's goals. You just can't make that work the way it's currently structured, as far as I can tell. Obviously, there are always exceptional places with exceptional people. In fact, the University of Missouri is one of the best places I've ever discovered for being able to do this kind of thing. But I'm starting to think that may not be enough.
Could I kind of piggyback on that to ask a question? Gabrielle Bammer has written about this, so my question will be phrased in a way that I probably can't help being biased, but I'm curious seeing, I guess for all of you, but Jack, particularly given your position in the organization with being a top-down influencer of motivated integrators, do you see a gender association with people who fill in this tragedy of the commons, the kind of serving the greater good over their own individual glory, or do you not see one?
I don't have a sample size that's big enough to answer that well. On the other hand, I'm looking at a screen with 4 people, only one of whom is male. So I have no trouble identifying females who are A, interested in the subject, and B, work hard to make it work. Mm-hmm. But I would really hesitate to try to count and answer that question with any kind of firm, data set. I don't have it. Certainly the females I have here are very cooperative. Well, actually, no, wait a minute. My sample size is too small. I can't do it.
I feel the same for my personal sample size and things people self-select, for their aptitudes. But Hips or Kellye, do you have any interest in that topic or answer for that?
I do. Finding that person has been absolutely critical to every single project I've ever managed, because you have to, at least from my standpoint, I have to have a scientist who's it really is a credible scientist, well respected in the field, who also cares more about the task at hand than their own career. Because you're basically, in what I do, we're asking them to give up time, to work for a community, whether it's a small community or whether it's a very large multidisciplinary community. We're actually wanting them to give back to the community, so to speak. And I will say that by and large, I'd say 75% of those people have ended up being women. Women who are in their 40s probably, or early 50s, but who have already passed the point they've achieved what they wanted to do scientifically. I think that's more the issue than anything else. But there have been a number of men who've been in that capacity, in that position as well. But again, they've been people who they no longer had this need to have another science cover or whatever. They already had one, so it didn't matter anymore. So I think that's a factor from my standpoint, but it's been absolutely critical to find those people. And I think, and this is where that psychology part comes in, or really understanding people, because it's having that skill to be in a meeting, your first meeting with a group of individuals that you've never met with, most of them, and figure out who is that person, who's going to be able to do that. So I think it's absolutely critical.
It's like many things. I really wonder whether it's a personality trait or a teachable thing. When a team here in my center, gets a breakthrough because they did something really unusual that they might not have done alone, that makes my day, week, month. I mean, it's as exciting as one of my own research outputs, in fact, maybe more exciting. So And that's just the way my personality is. I'm a generalist, and everything is interesting to me.
That's great. I see that Amanda McMillan has a question, so I want to invite her to throw it out there.
Great, thanks, Christine, and thanks to all three of our panelists. It's always so interesting to hear from the different corners of the country, as well as from the people on all sorts of levels of expertise in this field. Pips, I was really intrigued by your mention of the necessity of emotional intelligence and soft skills in the work that you all are doing. I know locally here in Durham, I work with the Clinical and Translational Science Institute here at Duke, working with a lot of medical researchers in particular. When I throw that kind of language at them, though, I tend to encounter a great deal of resistance. People think that they're already good at managing others and dealing with each other emotionally, or they just think it's too kumbaya, to be blunt, I guess. Have you encountered this kind of resistance in your own work, or I asked this of the entire panel, and if so, what strategies have you all employed to overcome it?
Yes, definitely. Definitely what you're saying rings a bell with me. Yeah, it is challenging, and I kind of think speaks to our training as scientists and some of the things that Jack was mentioning, that we train people in academia to be the experts and to be self-reliant and to be strong in their voice and get up and be able to talk in front of people with authority. And that's a training that we get from the very beginning as a scientist. And that doesn't always jibe well with the collaborative spirit that we're kind of trying to talk about, and bigger team projects where people have to come together and give a little and take a little and find that win-win. I at this point in my research, I'm just identifying things that I think are important. There's other people who are much better at me than and have developed different techniques for developing emotional intelligence within a group and collaborative skill sets, and there are lots of things that you can find online about that. I think it is challenging, and I think one of the things that I've experienced is that it's challenging to try to get out ahead of that curve. So you're working on those skill sets and activities before it becomes a problem because you don't have it or something's gone horribly wrong. And so I am really looking forward to, I don't have great answers for you at the moment, but I actually am looking forward to developing some exercises that teams can do that can develop these skill sets. We've at our university, we've talked recently about the fact that there are not a lot of leadership and collaboration courses. There's not a lot of training. And if that's built into a program and built into an education program, I think that's maybe a good place to start that kind of thing, rather than when you're in a team and you've got all these professionals together and they really want to get to like the meat of the project. They don't want to sit around and talk about, emotional intelligence. They want to, start thinking about the science and put together the science. One of the sneaky things that Jack has done is introduce beer, and one of the sneaky things that we've done is to try to introduce things like kayaking or hiking or being in a beautiful setting while we're having our meetings. So some of those things are happening. They're not necessarily trainings that we're doing, but we're allowing for a kind of a different kind of interaction and a different way of conversations taking place. And I found those events and those places have been really important for the team building that we've had. So I think I'm maybe sidestepping your question a little bit, and I think there's probably better people or people who have had more experience teaching groups how to do that, but I've definitely identified that it is important and looking forward to kind of learning more about that myself. So
maybe I'll try to approach it, at least in how we try to implement it. in my case, we're dealing with trying to put teams together that are not at one institution. They're not even in one country. So it's really trying to find people who would be, one, willing to do that to begin with. In many cases, they offer, one of the things one advantage we have is we do have industry participation and industry opportunities for scientists who pick up certain skills, and that actually helps us lead. But I think in one of the areas that we're expanding in very strong at this point is in strengths-based leadership. Really, when we look at a team, what are those strengths that are in that team? Who is the right person on our team, either within our own organization or within our consortium? Which one of our leaders has the right skills to be able to take something on, and that we can have them move forward. So to me, I think it's really looking at those aspects, and I couldn't agree more with Pips. Frankly, I think everybody should get leadership training when they're in graduate school, or frankly, I'd even do it for your bachelor's, because it'll help you be a better human being, better citizen. You'll know more about yourself. But, short of that, I think it certainly ought to be a part of the science curriculum. And in that process, just learning to be a leader will help you learn to be a better collaborator, in my view.
And there's plenty of research on ideal team makeup. It won't apply to every team, but there are some generalizations that you can use across projects, I think. I don't know if you're all familiar with the paper by Veazey et al. That appeared in Science a couple of years ago, showing that the makeup of a successful science research team is almost identical to the makeup of a successful Broadway musical production team.
I didn't see that.
Yeah, it's very cool. As an ecologist, I like broad generalizations, and so that was very, very attractive to me. But the science of team science people are doing a lot of interesting work on this.
I wanted to share that our host, Matt Hotze, is unable to raise his hand, but wanted to
I'm here.
let everybody. Oh, but you're here. Okay.
Yeah, I can unmute myself, but I can't do the nice fancy because I'm the host.
Oh, great. I'll let you recommend your own recommendation then. Thank you.
So I was hearing all these people talk about these sort of social activities, which are considered, some by some maybe to be distractions. But there's a good book that's based on a TED Talk called Beyond Measure. And I don't have the author in front of me, but I read the whole book, and it's a short read, but they really talk about the value of social capital amongst the team. And so my team that I work with, I'm the administrative director of an engineering research center, and the challenge is trying to bring people together across 4 different universities. And one of the things that the book really stresses is this idea that in order to get people to work together, they have to care about each other, right? And so if they've flipped over in a kayak together, that's an experience where they're gonna sort of be outside of their normal sphere, and then afterwards they're going to feel a lot more connected and a lot more able to do research together. Or if they've had a couple beers together, I think that's gets to that concept. And I've been looking for ways to try to promote social capital when our team only meets a couple of times a year. So that's I think that's one of the places where you can kind of move the needle and get people talking and see what comes from it. So anyway, wanted to add that there.
I have reached a very strong conclusion that nothing matches a face-to-face meeting. Yeah. Absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
And I'm really sorry, Pips, that you got that span of area you've got to cover. But the most successful research projects I know absolutely, meet at least once a year, given that there may be spread across the country and the world. So I'm totally convinced of that. I also was convinced of the beer thing after reading a peer-reviewed paper that demonstrated that employees, I think it was employees of companies, it could have been academia, I forget, are more creative and have better ideas if they had been interacting with alcohol present than not. And being a scientist, I like data, you know, and I like peer-reviewed evidence for things. In fact, in convincing our scientists to communicate more broadly, that's been very important. They want to know, A, does this really work? And B, does it work for my career? And data are accumulating quickly that really help us convince them. And that, I find it really important, if you want to get scientists to participate in anything that's has more social to it, they want to know, so what's in it for me, and do we know that this works?
I think one of the things that's been successful with some of the projects I've been involved in have been being able to identify a person who might have a need in the group and linking them with someone who can help them. And in that process, they start bonding and collaborating more, and then it just kind of grows from that. I mean, clearly this is not something you can do overnight, but I also agree that you have to have that face-to-face meeting at least once, and preferably twice a year. I mean, most of mine are very, very large international groups, and even in our international groups, we do a face-to-face at least once a year, and when we can, we do it twice a year. And you know, I'm in the process now of putting together a much broader multidisciplinary project, and that will bring in the physical sciences and the biological sciences. And I'm really struggling now with trying to plan, how do I set up that face-to-face meeting? Because in the other projects, we've been able to find an appropriate scientific meeting that 90% of the people are going to be there. But now in this new project, that doesn't exist, because I've got meteorologists and wanting them to work with biologists or genomics people or precision ag people. So really how to do that is something that I'm struggling with as we try to implement this, but I think it's absolutely critical.
Maybe you could come to Orlando in June for the Science of Team Science.
Yeah, we could if we could get them all there. That's the problem.
Right.
Yeah, and in fact, that's what we're exploring, is to try to figure out ways to get funding both here in Europe and in Australia and in Asia for networks, to support the networks, so that we can at least have one meeting. We can get enough money from the individuals to support bringing everyone together. So,
well, so what you all are saying is really in line with you know, Dan Ariely is at Duke. He's a behavioral economist. And what you're saying now with all building the social capital and finding different ways to create personal connections face-to-face ties in a little bit with solving this tragedy of the commons issue. He talks about if you move people from their economic norms, where that's the currency, where you're going for your own incentives, and that kind of Jack outlined those limitations within academia. Then if you move to a place where you're actually operating under social norms and you owe this to a person because you care about that person, or the two of you care about the same scientific answer, then kind of finding ways to move us from these economic norms to social norms, it sounds like a theme across everybody. What this is leading me to think we might benefit from doing with our final 9 minutes or so is, I've heard some themes across what everybody, both the questions and what you all have mentioned in terms of what you see as good areas for us to focus on and improve. And I'd like for us to incorporate these things that this community wants into our proposal for a workshop for a half day of activity at the Science of Team Science meeting. In our planning call for this, you all mentioned, and people before at previous sites meetings have mentioned, kind of wanting to get into the concrete examples and, you know, answer some questions we all have. And so some notes I've taken is that, you know, in a couple of directions, it might be interesting if we're able to either explain to each other or even demonstrate methods for working through some of these things. So two issues I thought, you know, that were brought up are methods for getting groups to interact and span the boundaries that would have kept them apart, and maybe gain some emotional intelligence or awareness of that subject, given Amanda's question. That could be one area. And I know that sometimes you do it like, you guys remember the Sneaky Chef book where you can trick your kids to eat vegetables by making purees and they don't know? That's kind of the social exercises that we have done in the center, where they have emotional intelligence wrapped up, but from the standpoint of the participating researcher, they are only aware of the topic being their topic. So I would be interested, I mean, when we have piloted some scrimmages and things like this, it's been with the seat of the pants method, realizing that's important, but also building it specific to our topical area. And that's something all of you share, is deep knowledge in a topical area that's allowing you to have that systems view for how to pull it together. So I'd be interested in seeing examples or learning other people's examples. I could share what we've done of ways that you concretely get people in a room and do a thing with those people where at the end, maybe they have learned something about each other and moved toward a strategic goal, maybe built a strategy together. And the other kind of activity or thing that I'd love examples of is just what Matt was saying, looking for ways to make social capital rise up in a group that may or may not have selected each other based on social reasons, but need to align their incentives and get to know each other as humans. So of those two, or, would people be interested or have things to contribute in the ways of examples for how they've either done sort of bring together kind of systematic exercises for any of those reasons? And would you all think that that'd be a good use of our time, is to come together and either learn from each other in a buffet style or pick one and walk through it? I'm just throwing ideas out there and wondering if you all have ideas.
I could do that.
Yeah, I mean, I could too, although I actually see number 2 really tied to number 1, because if people have that social purpose, they're going to want to interact because they know they can't achieve it otherwise.
I may be projecting here, but it's always been my hypothesis that a lot of people go into the sciences to avoid a lot of social interaction. You can, after all, be very successful never going out of your office or lab. And I suffer from some social anxiety, which makes my job harder. And it came to me, the realization came to me kind of late, that especially as it becomes more collaborative, science is a social thing. It's not something in a test tube.
Yeah, I think we're on a good track, Christine. I like your ideas, and I think about what we've been able to do, or times that I've felt empowered by a leader, or when I've tried to do that for somebody else, to say, you are an important part of this team. And one of the things that that I think is not addressing it head on, but allows some of these things to develop, is the idea of putting together like a conceptual framework or a conceptual map. And I need to see how things fit together. I need to see how systems work together in order to understand the whole picture. So I'm always drawing on the board, and I don't have the expertise of the biologist and the meteorologist and the people on our team. So I'm always asking kind of these basic questions. Well, wait, what are you doing? How is that impacting this? And how does that relate to this? And what is the question? And how do those things come together? And I've been really, really excited about the idea of putting together these conceptual frameworks. And it allows everybody to kind of see what everybody else is doing, and it allows to see what they're doing, why it's important, and how it connects. And that, I think, sometimes stimulates those social interactions, because you're starting off with this place that people are comfortable with. They're comfortable in the science group talking about their science and what they know, and they're excited, they're curious, they want to see how their ideas are interacting and how they're supported by things or how they can impact things. So sometimes I think just that kind of working through that conceptual framework with somebody at the board like me, who's not afraid to ask dumb questions and just, really make it very apparent that they don't know everything in the room. I'm totally happy being that person, and I think that's kind of fun to be that person. But I think sometimes that exercise can allow people to come together and see why they're important for that project. So I wonder if there's other things that we could do. I'm using that more and more to say, wait a minute, I'm going to draw this because I don't understand what you're saying. And chances are, like, most people in the room don't understand how it's all coming together. But I have no shame in admitting that I don't know how it's all coming together. So I wonder if there could be something like that too, that I'd be happy to think about that a little bit more as well.
I use this onion model of project or program development in which there are relatively few people at the center who have that view of what we're doing, surrounded by a group of people who are almost there, but I mean, they're interested in the general topic, but they don't particularly want to be drawn into the integration. And then the people on the outside who you might need for something, and they don't really care about the big project. They do their thing, and you bring them in periodically to do their thing, and then they leave again. It's only the ones in the center that will actually show up and set up the chairs and tables because they got the whole picture. You can't expect more than a couple, though, in any project, as far as I can tell.
I think what Pip's actually mentioned is something that I found very useful. I'm not a genomic scientist. I know it because I had to learn it. And I'm not an expert in any one of these fields that I'm pulling scientists from. And I'm also not looking for money for my own project in those fields. And I think it's that independence that actually gives us the ability to ask what we think might be a stupid question, but we're really curious how it's going to pull together. And in doing that, you can actually move the conversation forward, because anytime, at least certainly from my standpoint, anytime that someone has to explain something, they will become more passionate about it themselves. And when they see that it actually fits in, I think in a broader scale, all of a sudden they'll move from being passionate only about theirs to seeing, in fact, how it fits into that other one. But I think it takes this independent person often to be able to say these things. I mean, I can ask a stupid basic question about genetics and not worry about it, and people, will explain it to me. But all in a way of trying to bring people together.
That's a really interesting thing, that in all of my thinking about what this community might be and what aspects we all have in common, I hadn't thought until you all are just saying it, that the willingness to be bold-faced honest about what you don't know is not that widespread in science.
No, it's not. Well, it works against most scientists.
Yeah.
If you're a scientist, you succeed by being excellent.
Yeah.
You don't want people to see that maybe there's something you don't know.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And this has been such a great hour and a half of giving me, just even in this point, amount of time, and hopefully others who've called in, an idea of how to make generalism, how to capitalize on the strength of that, and really articulate the unique value that this approach and our skill set that we are all kind of growing and depending on, how to bring that together into a group of people that we can rely on each other and also get great ideas, and really make a platform to explain in multiple directions why this is so critical. So I know we're a minute over. I just want to say thank you so much to the panelists. This is really fascinating. I really appreciate your time. Thank you everybody for calling in. And Amanda or Karen, I'll hand it over to you in case you have any final moments, logistics about the webinar or anything else you'd like to share. So thanks very much.
Sure. Thank you, Christine, for hosting or facilitating today. It was really helpful. And a shout out to Matt Hotze, who is at Rice University and served today as our IT host extraordinaire. We are grateful for your expertise and help in that regard. The link to today's webinar, I believe, will be emailed out via the listserv once it's available. So if you had if you missed something or you want to revisit the conversation, that will be coming at you shortly. Also, we are busily planning our next couple of webinars. I think a couple of the topics that we have potentially on the agenda include a talk with Nancy Davino, who it looks like is on the phone today, out of Georgia Tech, talking about success metrics or performance standards for people working in this field of facilitating team science. And that may take place in February, schedules permitting. And then we're looking further down the pike and hoping to have Gabrielle Bammer come and talk to us in April about the discipline of integration and implementation science. So stay tuned for that as well. But as always, Karen Demby at UNC, and I welcome your ideas for topics. If you yourself are interested in perhaps being a speaker or spearheading a panel, we would love to hear your ideas and get you onto the schedule. So don't be shy and reach out and touch us when the ideas occur. So thank you all again, and we'll look forward to hopefully seeing and or hearing from you in the next month.